There were two restaurants, and Hammond was very much a mill town. And one was Georgie's Cafe and the other was Shields Cafe. And there was the Hammond Hotel there, owned by a very, very colorful old guy by the name of Fournier. And people that worked in the mill, and the mill was a big, big employment provider, obviously. So lots of people stayed in the Hammond Mill and ate there regularly, lunch and dinner. But a lot of them also, they all had separate little books. So they come up from the mill and to Georgie's, and they had their meal, signed their book, and they, of course, they'd pay, when payday came up, then they'd settle the tab. And the same thing with Shields Confectionery, which was right on the main drag, Maple Crescent as we called it. Well, there's the barber shop, Jack Patterns Menswear, the red and white store that they just tore down here a while ago, Hammond Cash Store, Anchor Christensen. There was a hardware store right next to it, the name escapes me, Cutler's Butcher Shop at one time. Hammond was very active before everybody was wealthy enough to buy a car, and then they all took off and sort of abandoned the town. But the Friday and Saturday night in Hammond, when I was in my very early teens, you went down to Georgie's. You had a pool hall there, and we had some really interesting guys. Guy by the name of Lundgren used to come up, play his guitar. He had an old Buick convertible, sit out in front and whip up a couple of tunes, all country and western of course, and shoot pool and just generally have a little bit of fun.
But the other thing that we had was a locker, a cold storage locker with the freezers in it. And they didn't have that around. It came up to Haney later. It came to Clapson Packers up here. But they had wooden stalls, slatted stalls with doors and locks on them, and you could take your produce or your meat or whatever you had, and it had to be packaged correctly, and then you took it down and you put it in your locker and locked it. And when you needed food, you went down and got it. I mean, not everybody had deep freezers, and nobody had them in those days. And refrigerator freezers were about the size of a lunchbox or something. So that was a first, and we had actually two really good grocery stores. It had a field in it, the name of the one grocery store, and the other one was called Cash and Carry, owned by Anchor Christensen. And I just wish there was some of their family around to talk, but they're all in other places or gone. And Anchor's store, and the Hammond store later on became the Red and White. And before that, I can't remember, as I said, Hirschfield's store it was. And so you had all sorts, and we had a kind of a 15-cent store, you would call it nowadays. But in those days, but I can remember walking in the door and there'd be boxes and boxes and boxes of running shoes or rubbers that you put on over your shoes for the winter. And on the right-hand side was all these beautiful silk embroidery threads. And the store to me seemed very narrow. And I can't remember how long it was open, but it was a wonderful place to go. And then they had one of these big glass counters full of all sorts of untouchables. Eisner's restaurant on the corner, and Bill Dunlop, who is he was one of our past council members. We used to call him the Mayor of Hammond. Bill had a pool room with an ice cream shop at the bottom, and it had these lovely metal walls that were pressed so they looked like the outside of an ice cream cone, you know, that pattern. Absolutely beautiful, and I think they did bad things upstairs, probably gambled and stuff, but I wasn't in on that. But it was great, and then Nellie Louie had her little store down on the dike where you could get all sorts of things, cigarettes and bits and pieces. But yeah, it was a going little town. We had a barber shop and a menswear shop, and the menswear shop was there at least until I was a teenager, because I remember buying cufflinks there for my brothers.
Well, there's many of them, but I'll mention a couple of them. There's Ingles Barber Shop. Ingles Steppen just recently passed away. And that's a sad thing. he had that barber shop. It was, I forget who owned it, but they leased the property on a 99-year lease. So it's, God knows, it's got a long ways to go. The other one is the Red and White store, which is no longer there. It's, and Hammond Cash, which is now a pub. Hammond Cash was a pretty important place at that time because it wasn't just a food store, but it was a Hammond Cash and cold storage or something. And, you know, they had lockers. You could rent a locker because people didn't have home freezers in those days, and that's where you kept your frozen food.
The pool hall was a place of my whereabouts. The Hammond Cash store where my dad grew up and worked at. Hammond Jewelry is an old one. The old Hammond Confectionery on the corner. Ingles Barber Shop was a place to be noted. Offhand, of course, the old bank building, the Bank of Montreal, the BC Tel building, which are permanent, and I should say the Maple Ridge Hotel, probably called the Hammond Hotel, I think, in those days. Built, I think, in the 1920s, was a fixture where we spent all our time at as well.
Well, the Bank of Montreal stands out in my mind because that's my first investments in money. My mom would started an account for me there. And the Red and White store, going in there for groceries, and the pharmacy, the Rexall Pharmacy. I remember babysitting for the pharmacist when I got a little older. He lived right around where the road bends there at the corner. And the confectionery store I remember most of all because we would go and, like I said, buy a 5 or 10 cent bottle of pop or a ice cream cone or something like that there. That was our treat if we could when we'd walk down there and walk home again. And then, like I said, well, Bruce Christensen was in my class, and it was his dad, the anchor, that ran the meat lockers and that.
Of course, Hammond Cash store, and the Red and White was a very big. They had a big business in the Red and White because everybody charged it. Oh yes, and we forgot it. We can't forget Mr. Cutler, because that's where I got my turkey every Christmas. Was Cutler got a percentage of the turkeys they put it out to all the stores, you know, so they all got a little crack in BC Forest Products. Yeah, Mr. Cutler, what a guy he was. I enjoyed Hammond in every aspect. Yeah. You know that the old Hammond Hotel had the best raisin pie and cup of coffee for 25 cents that I've ever had in my life. And you can't believe all this, but Mr. Fournier, he was a 4-way cut on a plate of seeing to me because it was so big. But of course, I guess in those days, 2 bits went a long way.
There was Hanson's hardware store, and then there was Mr. Cutler had his butcher shop. My mother preferred for me to go there and get meat, and to Jack Shields. Oh, or to Dunlop's Confectionery, yeah. Oh my gosh, and when you got an ice cream, did you ever get an ice cream? I mean, 3 scoops. Yeah, my favorite was strawberry.
To deliver papers, the first paper route, I'm a little sidetracking here, but I'd go down through the mill and then there was, up onto the dike, and there was a little grocery store, just this, little tiny store. It's a tiny thing, but I can't remember what I bought there, but it was the first time I'd ever bought something myself, And she was a Chinese lady.
Nellie Louie's place, and I think one of her kids still lives around there somewhere. But I don't know that she did it for something to do or something. I don't think she ever made any money out of it, because little rats would go in there and steal a package of gum or whatever the hell, a chocolate bar. She was a delightful old dear. And it's a funny thing, when I later ran for public office and she told me privately, she said, I know you were stealing gum, but she said I'd vote for you anyway. She was quite a darling.
It was across the street from my grandfather's hotel. Dunlop's had a confectionery hotel sort of thing, and they lived upstairs. And then after them, I think it was a family named Jorgensen's that had it. They call it Jorgie's Cafe. Around the corner of the old Red and White store in and it was kind of divided into Hanson's run the hardware, dry goods parts, and you know, people made their own clothes. So there was a big. My grandma at the hotels, she was a dressmaker, seamstress. She had a little room in the back there. She made drapes for people and dresses, and a little old barber shop there in the old days, which the Pattern brothers ended up starting. And then, yeah, there was the drugstore, which latter years Garney Stinson had the drugstore where there was another older people before that, forget their name. And then Shields Cafe, which was kind of the competitor to the other two cafes sort of thing, and they had the stools all around. They didn't have any booths. My grandpa had booths, and same as the Jorgies didn't have any booths either, but my grandfathers had all these booths all around the edge because they served big meals every day, like roast pork, roast beef, bang bang, because everybody either rode their bike to work or carpooled, and for whatever it was the charge, you know, they had a big dinner at lunchtime. It wasn't soup and sandwiches, it was a full-on meal. Spent a lot of time kind of in that in Anchor's butcher shop, because they lived kitty corner from us on Westfield Street, and Anchor Jr., my age, we hung out and stuff, and so we'd go down and hang out, and his dad would have us making sausages and stuff, cranking the machines and feeding the meat in and tying the links and stuff, and then going with him to some farmer that selling them a calf or a cow or whatever. They'd take it down to Pitt Meadows to a slaughterhouse there. And then, of course, they delivered groceries too to a lot of the older people. They didn't have cars or way to get it, so they always had little Austin vans. And as soon as Anchor Jr. got big enough to drive, he could go delivering the groceries and stuff. So there's always 2 or 3 kids hanging around the corner to jump in the van. If you weren't kind of helping around the store, if you're helping around the store, you're fine. You go with Anchor and go deliver groceries. It would take 2 of you to take the groceries to Mrs. Poirier or whoever. But the garage, it was kitty corner. It was Bullock's garage. Mr. Bullock, he was a stern-looking old. He'd been a big sergeant or something in the First World War, I think. He was just a gruff old guy. And then the GIB Motors, which is here, that was Gillis's garage, and the brothers there, they ran that for years. And